Hello and welcome to another Sprinterra video. Today we're going to be continuing the discussion on financial reporting in Acumatica. So previously we looked at kind of just a general report overall, and today we're going to take a dive into the row sets, which are one of the core components of a financial report in Acumatica. So I'm going to jump into the report definition. So I'm going to go back here to the landing page to edit report. And we talked on a previous video about what's included in this row definition, so we won't spend too much time here. But where we will go is into our row set. So you can see here there's a row set defined, a column set defined, and in this report, even a unit set is defined. The row set and column set are always required. The unit set is optional, and it can provide an additional layer of visibility. So we're going to go into this row set. And this is how the entire row structure of your financial report is determined. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of tab back and forth between the financial report itself and our row set to give you an idea of what the settings in the row set correspond to in the actual visibility and layout of the report itself. Now, the report that I've chosen has a fairly complex column structure where you can see it's got many different columns. But today we're going to talk explicitly about the different rows that are set up here. And then in another video, we will talk about the columns. So we're just going to run through the row set across the board, kind of left to right here, and talk through what each of these means. We may not go into incredible depth on every single one of these options here, just for the sake of the time of the video. But we are absolutely available to talk in more depth going forward. So first, we're going to start with the code. This is simply an identifier for each of the different rows, and this is going to put them into a sequence. So if I realize that my sales details section here needed to be down here under my returns and allowances, I could simply change the numbering so that instead of being 100, this could be row 125 or something along those lines. These row codes can also be referenced in formulas, so we'll talk about that in a second, but it's essentially identifying the sequence of rows, and then for formulas, it allows us to easily bring in the rows that we need. Next up is our description. So you'll see the descriptions showing here, revenue, sales details. They're showing in some cases on the report here. So you're seeing revenue, sales revenue, then you're seeing some actual information down here. And we'll talk through why in some cases it's pulling the description directly from what's been entered here versus in some other cases it may be pulling something slightly different. Now, that's how you can control the descriptions of what's showing on those on the rows in your report. Next one is very important. This is the type of the row, and this is going to determine how data is pulling into the row. So you can see for these first few, they're referenced as captions, and in most cases, captions are used for headers, which is a little interesting because we do have a header option here, which works very similarly. But in many cases, captions will be used for headers. They may be used to put blank spaces and that sort of a thing. So captions are going to be, you can see revenue, sales revenue. These captions here correspond to the revenue header and then the sales revenue header here in our financial. So there's no GL data that's tied to these types of rows. It's simply whatever you put in the description is going to pull over to the report. And we'll talk through, a little over here, you can see you've got some height settings, you've got indentation requirements, you can make them bold. So if you want a bold header, you can do all of that to kind of set up the header to be exactly as you want it. Now, moving on down the line, you can see now we've got some GL types. So this is where your actual GL data is going to pull in. And anytime that you have a GL type, you're typically going to identify the data source. Where do we want that GL data to pull from? So in this case, if we're pulling GL data, we're going to set up a data source and we're going to say we want anything with an account class of sales to come over here. And you can see there's all kinds of different settings in here as far as how we want that data to show. But what we've decided to do is pull any account from the account class, but we are telling it to expand by account. So it should list any of the accounts that are available within the sales account class on the report. The alternative would be if we were not expanding this and we had this set to expand to nothing, that's where you would actually see this sales details description come from. And this description would contain all of the data for any account tied to this account class. However, since we're telling it to break out by account, now it's going to show the account name as opposed to the actual filled in description that we have here. So that's important to note. But you have all kinds of different options. You could pull by an account range, a sub account range for certain branches. In most cases, we're typically going to use the account class because the account class is really their whole purpose in Acumatica is for financial reporting. So it allows us to easily bring in groups of accounts into the areas of the reports that we need them. Next up, you see a type of line. So this is where we have down here, you can see right above total sales revenue on our report, above total sales revenue, we have this underline. That's coming from this line section. So with our line here, this goes in conjunction with a line style. So we have it set to be a solid line, but you have all these other line types as well. So we're doing a line type of row. We want it to be 2 pixels high, and it's going to be a solid line. That's what we're telling it to do. You have the options to do double, you can do dashed, you can do all kinds of different things. Our next and final line type that we're going to talk about today is our total. So if you're doing totals in a report, you can see this is for total sales revenue. We wanted to add up data from multiple rows. In this case, we did a formula with at sign. So when you're doing an at sign, it's going to reference explicitly that row code. So we're saying at 100 plus at 0101. The other way that you can do formulas is you can use something like this where you're doing a sum. So when you're doing a sum, it's from row code to row code. So it's going to sum anything from row 300 all the way down through 399, which is this entire section. So those are the main ways that you do formulas. You will either hit a range like 300 to 399, or as we did up here, you'll select specific rows and then add them together. So that's how we're getting our totaling in these reports. You can see all of these totals sections here. We're telling it to add up the value of all of the detail underneath. All right, moving along, you've got a format column here. This allows us to determine if we want format that's specific to a row, you can set that up. In many cases, the formatting we maybe do from the column set because you may want certain columns to be formatted certain ways. Like for example, if you have a column for percentage of sales or something like that, you'll format it as a percent versus if you have a column that's returning GL data, you may format it with 2 decimal points and to show in parentheses if it's a non-normal balance, that type of information, you can set that up in the format here. We talked about the data source. Next up, you have style. So like for this header, for example, we set it to be bold. And in some cases, you may increase the font size. You could change a color. You could change the alignment. You have all that flexibility there at your fingertips. So printing controls, line break is default. That's just going to tell it to go to the next line. You could hide rows, maybe if they're being used as part of a formula later down the line, but you don't want them to show necessarily. You just want the end formula to show. You could hide them. You can merge next if you want it to show very closely related to the next row. If you want to outline certain sections, you could start a box at the beginning and then end the box at the end of it. So if you wanted to outline this entire revenue section, for example, you could use a box around the entire portion there. For page break, this is how you tell the report if you always want it to break to another page at a certain point. So let's say you have a very long and complex report and there are a couple different points throughout the report where you always want it to break, go to the next page. You can determine that here with a page break. We talked about height, indentation. So indentation, you can see down here in the sales revenue details, it's doing a little indent, and that corresponds to here on this report where you see these slightly indented. We talked about line styles, and then you've got suppress empty and hide zero. So suppress empty is anytime that the GL data is returning null, so there's no activity for the period that you've selected or the time range you've selected, and the accounts you've selected, it can simply hide those rows from the report. That's what suppress empty is going to do. Alternatively, you have hide zero, which is if it returns no value, rather than showing a zero, it's just going to show blank. So that's the main difference between these two. This suppress empty will hide it from the report entirely. Hide zero will change the zero from a zero to a blank value. It's going to keep the row, but it's going to show as a blank as opposed to a zero. And then finally, we'll talk about linked rows. So if you're linking to another row, like for example, you can see these are linked to row 175. It's essentially saying these are going to behave as that other row behaves. So if 175 is not showing on the report, then these rows are not going to show. And this is a good way to hide sections of a report. So for example, if an entire section of a report has all the GL details in that section have no value and they're set to suppress empty and they hide, you would ultimately want the totals to hide. You would want any underlines in that sections to hide. So the end result would be, let's say, you know, down here, just for argument's sake, let's say our entire operating expenses are nothing for a period. Obviously unrealistic, but just as an example, if we wanted to hide this entire section, we could set all of these to suppress empty, but then we'd still have an underline remaining. We may you may have different areas still remaining. So you could set them as linked rows to be dependent upon some other row. And when that other row hides, then the underlying row would hide as well. So that's kind of where you may see that come into play. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. That's a very high level of row sets. There's obviously a ton of detail that goes into there, and we could you could have a several hour session on this exact topic. So if you ever have any questions or would like to learn a little bit more, we'd be happy to discuss. But for now, appreciate your time, and we'll see you in the next video.